packed into a small parcel of empty space on the shores of Kowloon Harbour and expanded gradually on an artificial shore, Kai Tak was an airport which became a victim of its own success, standing as the main gateway to Asia's world city and thereby leading it to being the busiest single-runway airport on Earth. This accolade came at a price, though, as in order for Hong Kong to grow, its airport needed to as well, and such a task could not be accomplished at Kai Tak. Though regardless, even 20 years after the lights were dimmed and put out forever, the memory of Hong Kong's Kai Tak Airport still resonates in the minds of both aviation enthusiasts and the general public as one of the most spectacular man-made feats of the 20th century. The original idea of introducing an airfield to Hong Kong started way back in the infancy of aviation itself, when in 1912, two businessmen, Ho Kai and O Tak, formed the Kai Tak Investment Company as part of a scheme to reclaim land in Kowloon for further developments, though while attractive land was acquired, their attempts at creating new developments on the site failed to materialize, and thus the Hong Kong government bought the area and put it to use as an airfield. The Kai Tak airfield originally consisted of a grass strip located on the shores of Kowloon Bay, sandwiched between the water and the densely packed streets of the ancient walled city, the formative years of the airport being slow, with major growth only occurring following the opening of the Abbott School of Aviation in 1924 by Harry Abbott, an early aviation pioneer. Very soon, the RAF had begun operations at the airfield and expanded its facilities to cope with the increased demand, followed later by a variety of flying schools, which included the Hong Kong Flying Club, the Far East Flying Training School, and the Aero Club of Hong Kong, which still exists today as an amalgamation known as the Hong Kong Aviation Club. Expansion of the airport to accommodate a wider variety of aircraft began in 1928 with the creation of a concrete slipway, allowing early flying boats the ability to taxi onto land for boarding and maintenance, followed in 1935 by the construction of the airport's first control tower, with operations during March 1936, seeing the inauguration of international flights to Britain with Imperial Airways, and then the establishment of domestic operations across Southeast Asia. Kai Tak's continued growth, however, wouldn't truly come to fruition until the outbreak of World War II, though the price of expanding the airport to become a major facility was paid for in blood, starting on December 8, 1941, when forces of the Empire of Japan launched a massive strike against the colonial powers of Southeast Asia, including Hong Kong, only 4 hours after the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. The attack began with a bombardment by the Imperial Japanese Army using aircraft and artillery shells from their stronghold on the Chinese mainland, the Axis power having occupied large swathes of China during the 1937 Second Sino-Japanese War, while Allied forces, comprised of British troops from the UK, Canada and India, as well as free Chinese factions and a volunteer contingent, were powerless to stop the Japanese assault. On Christmas Day 1941, the battle for Hong Kong ended when the British forces, who had become stranded on Hong Kong Island, surrendered, allowing the Japanese to occupy the city and use it as a base to strike out against Allied resistance in southern China and French Indochina, thus requiring the expansion of the Kai Tak airfield in order to base fighters and bombers. Utilizing slave labor comprised of Allied prisoners of war and members of the local population, 2 concrete runways were built on reclaimed land in Kowloon Bay, runway 1230 and runway 0725, with runway 1230 being directed southeast, parallel to the shore, while 0725 faced northeast. In order to undertake this work, hundreds of lives would be lost as prisoners were worked to death in the unbearable heat of the Hong Kong sun, being beaten, starved, or arbitrarily executed, to the point that the number of those killed expanding the airport has never been truly determined. The cost wasn't just in human lives, but also in Hong Kong's historical artifacts, with the ancient wall of the Kowloon walled city, which dated back to the Song dynasty of around 960 AD, being destroyed to provide building materials, while a memorial for the last Song dynasty emperor, the 8-year-old boy emperor Zhao Bing, which had stood since the 13th century, was also leveled. Eventually, once the expansion was complete, the Imperial Japanese Air Force used Kai Tak to obtain aerial domination of the region for the next 3 years of occupation, though with the tide turning in favor of the Allies, the Japanese would unconditionally surrender on August 15, 1945, following the atomic attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, concluding a brutal occupation which had seen thousands of ethnic Chinese and Allied prisoners of war murdered. Following the departure of Japanese forces, the airport was redesignated HMS Navcatcher, a Royal Navy shore base from September 1945 to August 1946, followed in September 1946 by a group of Australian aviators establishing what would become Hong Kong's flag carrier Cathay Pacific. This airline, using a fleet of ex-military Douglas C-47 Skytrains, operating freight services between Hong Kong and Shanghai, but soon expanded to a multitude of destinations, as well as branching out into passenger flights. The Royal Navy maintained a presence at Kai Tak, forming a Royal Naval Air Station at the airport in 1947 named HMS Flycatcher, though this would gradually diminish over time as the presence of the Royal Navy in Hong Kong was reduced, eventually leading to the only British Air Force presence in the Hong Kong region being at the nearby Shek Kong Airfield, which was operated under the auspices of the RAF. In light of the city's growing economy, it was only natural that the airport would see further expansion, this being given greater incentive through the proposal to introduce larger airliners including turboprops and jets, with types such as the Bristol Britannia 102 and the pioneering de Havilland Comet being early examples, thus requiring the need for a brand new runway that would be built on a man-made peninsula out into Kowloon Harbour, this being designated runway 1331 and would come to an initial length of 5,459 feet. For a short period, Kai Tak featured 3 runways, the original 1230 and 0725 and the new 1331, though 1230 was quickly closed once 1331 began operations, while 0725 was left undeveloped, the new runway opening in 1957, but work on accommodating increasingly larger aircraft wasn't finished yet, as the prospect of the upcoming Boeing 707 meant that runway 1331 was lengthened again to 8,350 feet, with this extension being completed in 1958, just prior to the launch of the 707 with Pan Am on their Clipper services across the Pacific. It was during this period that runway 0725 was closed, and the land it once occupied was redeveloped for other uses, while by the early 1960s, Kai Tak had become one of the most important centers for aviation travel in Southeast Asia. The severing of diplomatic ties between the Western powers and Communist China, as well as the post-colonial unrest in Vietnam and Burma, seeing Hong Kong and the neighboring Portuguese colony of Macau be perceived as the last bastion of Western democracy and capitalism in the region. To cope with the increasing demand, the iconic white terminal building at Kai Tak was constructed along the airport's northwest perimeter, and runway 1331 was expanded for the final time in 1970 to 11,130 feet, in preparation for the arrival of Boeing 747 jumbo jets, this extension being completed in June 1974, though the full length of the runway wasn't put into use until December 1975 due to delays in the construction of the new airport tunnel, which kept the northwestern end of the runway temporarily closed. However, Kai Tak's situation had meant that the airport was left in a curious position when it came to operations, especially with regard to large jets such as the Boeing 747, as due to Kowloon being situated on a small area of floodland at the foot of giant peaks which pass to the north, forming a long arc that travels from southwest to northeast, a conventional approach to runway 13 was not possible due to the presence of the towering 1,500-foot Beacon Hill less than 2 miles from the strip. In response to this obstruction, aircraft approaching from this direction had to come in from across the Lai Chi Kok district and over downtown Kowloon at a bearing of 088 degrees before making a sharp 47-degree right-hand bank at less than 1,000 feet to line up with the runway, while departing runway 31 was essentially the same principle but in reverse, with aircraft having to perform an immediate left-hand bank to avoid Beacon Hill, while runway 31 arrivals and runway 13 departures were essentially conventional. The result was spectacular, as gigantic airliners swept in over the city streets, with their wings seemingly only feet away from the rooftops of densely stacked apartment blocks, Kowloon echoing to the sound of Rolls-Royce, Pratt & Whitney and General Electric engines that soared overhead, becoming one of the most dazzling attractions in Hong Kong, with no other location on Earth hosting commercial airliners on approach to an active runway in such close proximity to a central business district while performing a bank. However, one of the biggest issues to face Kai Tak were the adverse weather conditions Hong Kong is frequently subjected to, with typhoons and freak storms often battering the area, thus making what was already a difficult approach even harder to manage, the result being the installation of an Instrument Guidance System or IGS in 1974 to aid runway 13 landing, which allowed for a huge improvement to air traffic during poor weather. This was accompanied by the creation of a large board on the side of a nearby hill known as Lion Hill, a red and white navigational aid, affectionately dubbed the checkerboard, that was used as a visual guide for pilots approaching runway 13 and became a prominent feature of the area. Contrary to the inherent difficulty of the runway 13 approach, and the fact that only a select group of specially trained pilots were allocated to fly it, Kai Tak proved itself to be quite a safe airport when considering the very few accidents that occurred during its operational life, these being attributed largely to weather, as was the case for the first fatal accident at Kai Tak on January 25, 1947, when a Philippine Airlines DC-3 crashed into Mount Parker during poor visibility, killing 4 crew members. The deadliest accident at Kai Tak, however, happened on August 24, 1965, when a United States Marine Corps C-130 Hercules crashed shortly after takeoff from runway 13, killing 59 of the 71 people aboard, the cause of the accident being attributed to a failure in the number 1 engine, which resulted in the Hercules veering to the left once it had lifted off and striking the sea wall. Another notable crash was that of Thai Airways International Flight 601, as operated by Sud Aviation SE-210 Caravel 3, Hotel Sierra Tango Golf India, on June 30, 1967, which crashed into Victoria Harbour while trying to land during a torrential rainstorm, the co-pilot who was in command being unable to find the runway in the deteriorating conditions, and eventually, after making an abrupt heading change, crashed into the harbour to the right of the field, killing 24 of the 80 people aboard. 6 months later, on November 5th, another crash occurred when Cathay Pacific Flight 033, operated by Convair CV-880, Victor Romeo Hotel Foxtrot X-Ray, crashed during takeoff from runway 13 while operating a routine service to Bangkok, when following an attempted aborted takeoff due to severe vibration, the airliner swerved off the runway to the right and crashed into the harbour, as caused by an overuse of differential braking by the crew, leading to the death of 1 person. On October 18, 1983, Lufthansa Boeing 747-200 freighter, Delta Alpha Bravo Yankee uniform, abandoned takeoff after the number 2 engine malfunctioned at a speed exceeding the V1 takeoff abort decision point, leading to the aircraft overrunning the runway onto soft ground and sustaining severe damage, though the 3 crew aboard suffered only minor injuries. On August 31, 1988, the right outboard flap of CAAC Hawker Siddeley Trident Bravo 2218 hit the approach lights of runway 31 while landing in rain and fog, with the right main landing gear then striking a lip and collapsing, thus causing the aircraft to run off the runway and slip into the harbour, killing 7 aboard, the accident's cause not being conclusively determined, though the pilot's decision to continue the landing in deteriorating conditions was singled out mostly for blame. Perhaps the most notable crash at Kai Tak Airport took place on November 4, 1993 during a typhoon, when China Airlines Flight 605, operated by 5-month-old Boeing 747-400, Bravo 165, overran the runway and crashed into the bay, resulting in 23 injuries, the aircraft having landed over 2/3 of the way down runway 13 and was unable to stop before tumbling over the sea wall and into the harbour, the cause being placed on the pilots, who were blamed for having not diverted to a different airport like other preceding flights. In order to allow operations to resume, the vertical stabilizer of the 747 was blown off using dynamite before the entire airframe was recovered and towed to the nearby cargo terminal, the written-off airliner being used as a fire training rig before eventually being scrapped sometime in the mid-1990s. The final accident to occur at Kai Tak took place on September 23, 1994, when heavy-lift cargo airlines Lockheed L-130 Hercules, Papa Kilo Papa Lima Victor, en route to Jakarta, Indonesia, lost control shortly after takeoff from runway 13 when the pitch control system of one of its propellers was said to have failed, leading to the deaths of 6 of the 12 people aboard. As the years passed and Hong Kong's economy grew, Kai Tak became the main gateway into this vibrant city, though sadly, the increasing demands of this bustling metropolis caused severe problems as to capacity and possible expansion, with the issue from its infancy being that Kai Tak Airport was incredibly limited in its ability to extend its facilities negated by the presence of existing conurbations, the mountains and Kowloon Bay. Though further land reclamation was mooted, it was quickly dropped on cost grounds, while proposals for a second runway, aside from the expense factor, were also not possible due to the limited capacity in the approach alley runway 13 occupied, with either side of the existing approach being lined with tower blocks and high-rise apartment buildings, thus meaning that airliners landing on two runways would be forced onto the same flight path in violation of aviation regulations. As land values increased, the airport authorities frequently clashed with real estate developers who wished to exploit the Kowloon area through skyscrapers and taller buildings, their ambitious plans precluded only by the presence of the airport, Kai Tak by 1990 becoming by far the busiest single-runway airport in the world, with most of its traffic comprising of large airliners such as Boeing 747s, Lockheed TriStars, DC-10s and many more. Passenger numbers had increased to upward of 20 million per annum, and nearly 2 million tons of freight passed through each year, making it the third busiest airport on Earth in terms of passenger numbers. But with options becoming increasingly limited, there was no other choice than to close Kai Tak and start afresh. Intentions to replace Kai Tak Airport had begun as early as November 1951, when the Director of Civil Aviation for Hong Kong identified that the field would not be able to expand indefinitely, and that a new site should be sought elsewhere in the colony to allow for a facility that would be unrestricted by the foreseen rise in air travel, but this proposed closure of the field was dropped due to financial reasons. In 1974, as Boeing 747s and large wide-body trijets began to sweep in over the city streets, the question of Kai Tak's long-term future was once again brought to the fore, with feasibility studies beginning in earnest as to a viable location where a brand new and unconstrained airport could be constructed, the biggest concern for the project being a lack of suitable flat land on which to put the facility. Eventually, after 15 years of research and development, the island of Cheklap Kok, 15 miles west of Hong Kong in the Zhujiang River estuary, will be the site of the new field's development under the Airport Core Program, a concept that would cost 160.2 billion Hong Kong dollars and was formally announced on October 11, 1989, by the then Governor David Wilson, and work officially began in September 1991. The Airport Core Program would comprise many substantial engineering elements, including a vast land reclamation scheme that would flatten the island of Cheklap Kok and expand its former ground area to connect with the adjacent Lantau Island, while accommodating two runways, a large terminal, control tower and fuel, hotel and hangar facilities that would support it being the main hub for Cathay Pacific. As for the terminal itself, this would be a technical tour de force, incorporating only the most advanced computer software systems and structural engineering to create an open-air feel inside the building, while baggage and cargo would be sorted by an automatic handling system that was at the very cutting edge of technology for the time. As for connections between Hong Kong and the new airport itself, this would be supported by the creation of the Xingma Bridge, a double-deck suspension bridge that would carry both road and rail traffic between the city and Cheklap Kok, this structure spanning 4,518 feet in length and comprising two spans that would connect via the islands of Xingyi and Ma Wan, hence the title of the bridge. This vital link would eventually be opened on April 27, 1997, by former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, with a procession of Rolls-Royces and a vast display of fireworks heralding its inauguration, the opening of the Xingma Bridge being the last ceremony to be conducted by the British as the ruling power of Hong Kong, before the handover of the colony to the Chinese government in Beijing on July 1st. With the Xingma Bridge now opened, Highway 8, a high-speed expressway, would be driven across Lantau Island to reach the site of the proposed airport, as supported by the MTR Airport Express, a direct metro link from the terminal building to Kowloon and Hong Kong Island that would travel at 85 miles an hour and conduct the journey in 28 minutes. With work to construct the Cheklap Kok Airport now breaking ground, Kai Tak was on borrowed time as it entered the 1990s, with the estimated completion of the new airport being the summer of 1998, while in the meantime, the current airport continued to strain under increasing demands as more airlines and flights operated to and from the field, with noise pollution concerns demanding a curfew from midnight to 6:30 in the morning that hindered overnight operations for both passenger and freight flights. However, as the inevitable closure loomed ever closer as the 1990s progressed, Kai Tak entered into something of a renaissance, with appreciation for this unique airport drawing thousands of tourists to the city just so they could see for themselves the unbelievable sight of gigantic commercial airliners sweeping in low over the city streets. The end eventually had to come, though, and it did so on July 6, 1998, the handover from Kai Tak to Cheklap Kok having begun several weeks prior, as equipment had been gradually fed to the nearly completed new facility, including supplies, vehicles, containers and machinery, leaving only equipment essential for the day-to-day operations of Kai Tak on site when the final day came. Throughout July 5th, operations seemingly went on as normal, with no indication that in less than 24 hours, the airport would be silenced forever, the only abnormal thing being the thousands upon thousands of people who had flocked to the rooftops of apartments and car parks and to the perimeter fences to get their last glimpses of the famous checkerboard approach, with residents hiring out their balconies for a nominal fee, and some even throwing private parties as the hours of that warm summer Sunday ticked slowly by. Day turned to night, and flights continued in and out as the final hours closed in, with the last aircraft to ever conduct the famous checkerboard approach taking place at 23:38 on July 5th, when Dragonair Flight 841, an Airbus A320 from Chongqing Jiangbei International Airport, swept in overhead, rendering the streets of downtown Kowloon silent from the noise of jet engines. The last scheduled flight from Kai Tak departed 20 minutes later at 2 minutes after midnight on July 6th, that being Cathay Pacific Flight 251 to London Heathrow Airport, operated by a Boeing 747-400, while over the next hour, the remaining off-duty aircraft were ferried the short distance to Cheklap Kok, with the final aircraft to depart from Kai Tak International Airport being Cathay Pacific Flight 3340 at 0128, as operated by an Airbus A340-300. Kai Tak had fallen silent, and with a profound final statement by Richard Siegel, then Director of Civil Aviation, he gave the somber last words before dimming the lights briefly and then turning them off. But though the airport was now closed, work continued to ferry the remaining essential equipment by road and barge across the city to Cheklap Kok, one of the biggest logistical transfers in history. Cheklap Kok Airport itself had been officially inaugurated at a ceremony held on July 2nd, with China's President Jiang Zemin delivering the opening speech, though the first commercial flight to land at the field wouldn't take place until the morning of July 6th, when Cathay Pacific Flight 889, a Boeing 747-400 working the polar service from New York JFK, touched down on runway 07 right. However, such was the haste in replacing Kai Tak that many of the features at the new airport weren't ready in time for opening or developed early faults, with water supply and sewers not being fitted completely, telephones being installed but not connected to the lines, and the flight information display system suddenly shut itself down on the first day, which caused long delays. The most egregious problem, though, was that the baggage system had not undergone extensive troubleshooting, leading to luggage and freight, mostly comprising of perishables, being lost due to a software bug in the new airport's cargo handling program, this issue being so severe that Kai Tak's cargo terminal was temporarily reactivated to minimize the damage. Eventually, the teething issues of Cheklap Kok Airport were ironed out over the following weeks and months, and today the new airport is a global hub in the heart of Southeast Asia, serving over 1,000 flights per day, though even this facility was required to expand in order to accommodate the ever-increasing demand, with a third runway being added via land reclamation during 2021. As for Kai Tak itself, the iconic passenger terminal was later reused for government offices, automobile dealerships and showrooms, a go-kart racecourse, a bowling alley, a snooker hall, a golf range, and other recreational facilities. In the end, the former terminal was demolished between December 2003 and January 2004, while attempts were made by enthusiasts to spare 1 kilometre of Kai Tak's runway for general aviation purposes, though this was rejected by the government, and all structures on the site were levelled by 2006. The Regal Oriental Hotel of 1982, which was once linked by a pedestrian footbridge to the terminal building, being the only remaining active structure of the former airport. The only other original structure of the airport left intact today is the former fire station, situated at the far end of runway 31 and was built as part of the 1974 extension, which sat derelict for many years before being cosmetically restored in 2019, though no plans are in the works as to any potential future role for this building as part of the wider airport redevelopment. Another lingering reminder of the former Kai Tak Airport are 2 notable stubs on the Prince Edward Road, which once served the famous White Terminal building, these comprising 2 overpasses on the eastbound carriageway, with the east-facing overpass remaining truncated and derelict above the highway, while the west-facing overpass has recently been refurbished and integrated into a new access road that serves the wider Kai Tak redevelopment area. Today, the former runway has been converted for use as parkland and a cruise ship terminal, although there are still some sections of the original strip that remain present, which have yet to be redeveloped, while the wider airport apron and former terminal areas have been built up as apartment blocks and other structures. Despite its end in 1998, Kai Tak, even in memory, remains a unique and thrilling airport, as while the facility was fundamentally flawed by its constrained situation, and the increasing demands being placed on the field only hastened its demise, the legacy that this airport holds in aviation circles cannot be denied. Throughout its life, the airport symbolized many parts of Hong Kong's history, from its years under Japanese tyranny and oppression to its economic growth and prosperity in the late 20th century, with Kai Tak, even after 20 years, still holding a place in the hearts and minds of aviation enthusiasts across the globe, not just those who were alive to witness its magnificence, but also a new generation who can relive classic scenes from its long and illustrious history through the thousands of videos and pictures taken during its lifetime.